Look at James 1, starting in verse 9. I want to share with you the message that James confronted the first church of Jerusalem's members and his members at large with. And it was a call to looking at life from a different perspective. And I would challenge not only myself but all of us this morning to maybe in our minds start making some little adjustments about how we look at life and how we value people and how we value whether or not, as the man knocking at my door yesterday said, whether we've arrived or not. James confronted those first century Christians that life was all about having Christ and that He was all they really needed. In verse 9, he talks about the benefits of poverty. Now that's nothing that we would hear nowadays, the benefits of poverty. Let the brother of humble circumstances, of low degree, let the one who is struggling with life. Basically, in the ancient world, there were two kinds of poverty. There were those who had to work every day to earn enough to eat on, and there were those who could not work and had nothing to eat on and were basically starving. Those were the two levels of poverty. And so he says, let those of low degree, those who have not arrived, those who do not have financial means to last them into the future, let them glory, look at verse 9, in their high position. Now, I don't know if you think of poverty as a high position. I know that in the 60s, some of you weren't around then, but there was a war on poverty, the Great Society of Lyndon Johnson. And I really believe, the more I've studied that he had a great motivation. He thought that he could wipe out the ills and the accompanying evils of poverty in our country. But the Scriptures say that poverty is not all bad, that there are benefits to poverty. Look at verse 10. Let the rich man glory in his humiliation. Secondly, James addresses these people when he asks them to recalibrate their way of looking at things. He says, there are benefits to poverty and there are great dangers to wealth. I think we saw that in the little crash yesterday. There are great dangers to wealth if that's what you think life is all about. And if that's all you live for the moment. Jesus Christ in His earthly ministry said the worst thing could happen to anyone is for them to die in their sins. Do you know why? Sin is going to be the target of God's unending, eternal, fiery wrath. Sin is. And God put all the sin of the world upon Christ, and Jesus Christ paid the penalty for that, and all who will look to Him as their only hope, He will take their sin away from them. He will take away the guilt and the punishment and the wrath of God toward their sin. He will bear it for them. Doesn't mean they're perfect. They still sin, but immediately their sin is paid for by Christ, as He once and for all paid for sin. But if you die in your sin without it ever going on to Christ, then you will live eternally in eternal death of facing the wrath of God. And Jesus said about the Pharisees, for their hard-heartedness, He says, and you will die in your sins. Which was the worst thing He could say. It's worse than saying you'll go to hell. Because going to hell is just a physical place. But if you die in your sins will cause God's wrath to fierily, horribly, terrifyingly be upon you for eternity. It says here in this verse that the rich man is going to be humbled because like a flowering grass he'll pass away. And if he passes away without his sins being on Jesus Christ, then he will pass away with the fire of God's wrath forever on him. So James says in verse 9 to his congregation, there are benefits to poverty. There were many poor people in that church. He said there are great dangers to wealth, secondly. But look at verse 11. He says there that the sun rises with that scorching wind and withers the grass, and the flower falls off, and the beauty of the appearance is destroyed, and the rich one, in the midst of their pursuits of riches, is going to fade away. And he says, watch out for the false promises that possessions offer.